It was one of those evenings when everything felt unusually still, like the calm before a storm that no one expects. The wind barely stirred outside, and the only sound in our quiet suburban home was the ticking of the clock. I sat alone in our living room, staring blankly at the flickering television, not really watching whatever show was playing. My mind was a million miles away, lost in the dark maze of doubt and suspicion that had been eating away at me for months. Tonight was the night it all came to a head, whether I wanted it to or not. Tonight, I was going to confirm the one thing I had hoped to be wrong about. My wife and I had been married for a decade, 10 years of shared memories, ups and downs, and what I thought was unshakable trust. We had met in college, falling in love quickly. She was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. Kind, smart, funny. We built a life together, the kind of life I thought would last forever. But forever, it seemed, was an illusion I had convinced myself of. The changes were subtle at first, barely noticeable. She began staying out late more often, explaining it away with extra work, meetings, or nights out with friends. I wanted to believe her, and for a long time, I did. I trusted her completely. But then, there were the little things that began to gnaw at me, those almost imperceptible shifts in her behavior. She started wearing new perfume, something I had never smelled on her before. Whenever she went out, she would check her phone more frequently, always turning it away from me, smiling at messages she never mentioned. Her affection for me grew distant, like she was physically present but emotionally far away. For months, I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that my insecurities were playing tricks on me. We had always been so close, and I had no reason to suspect her of anything. But deep down, my gut kept telling me something was wrong. It was like living with a shadow hanging over me, always just out of sight but impossible to ignore. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. It started innocently enough. She told me she was going out for dinner with some coworkers, a routine event that had become increasingly frequent over the last few months. I remember nodding absent-mindedly, pretending to be okay with it, even though my stomach was in knots. She had done this before, many times in fact, but tonight felt different. There was something in the way she looked at me before she left, something that made my skin crawl. As soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed her phone. She had forgotten to take it with her this time, and that was all the opportunity I needed. My hands shook as I unlocked it, dread pooling in my gut like a lead weight. I scrolled through her messages, praying that I wouldn't find anything, but there it was, a long string of messages between her and a man named Jason, a name that had never come up in conversation, never been mentioned in all the years we had been together. The messages were filled with sweet nothings, intimate plans, and promises to see each other that night. I remember feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling as I continued reading. It was worse than I had imagined. This wasn't just a flirtation or some one-off mistake. She had been seeing him for months, sneaking around behind my back, pretending like everything was fine while she built a separate life with another man. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw her phone across the room and smash it into 1,000 pieces. But instead, I sat there, paralyzed by the weight of the betrayal. I couldn't breathe. The woman I had shared my life with, the woman I had promised to love and cherish forever, was living a lie. And tonight, she was out with him, probably laughing, probably holding his hand, probably kissing him like she used to kiss me. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to storm out of the house, to find her and confront her, to demand answers right then and there. But another part of me, a larger part, felt numb. I needed more time to process, to think, to understand how everything had gone so wrong. So I stayed. I stayed in the house that suddenly felt so empty, waiting for her to come home, waiting to see if she would lie to my face again. The hours dragged on. I couldn't focus on anything, couldn't sit still. Every time I looked at the clock, it felt like time was moving slower and slower. Midnight came and went, and still, she hadn't returned. My mind raced with a million different thoughts. Was she with him right now? Were they together at some romantic spot, laughing at my ignorance? Did she feel guilty at all? Or had she already decided that I didn't matter anymore? Finally, around 1 a.m., I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. My heart thudded in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. I sat up, my body tense as I waited for her to come through the door. A few moments later, I heard her footsteps on the porch, followed by the soft click of the front door opening. She walked in, humming to herself, clearly in a good mood. I watched from the shadows as she placed her keys on the counter and slipped out of her coat, completely unaware of my presence. She looked happy, radiant even. It made me sick to my stomach. How could she come back to me with that smile on her face after everything she had done? And then she saw me. Her smile faltered immediately, her eyes widening in shock as she registered my presence in the living room. "Oh," she said, her voice shaky, "you're still up." I didn't respond at first. I just stared at her, my emotions turning inside me like a storm. She fidgeted under my gaze, clearly uncomfortable but trying to maintain her composure. "I was just out with the girls," she continued, her voice strained. "You know, for that work thing." I could hear the lie in her voice, could see it written all over her face. But instead of confronting her directly, I simply stood up and walked over to her. She tensed as I approached, like she knew something was wrong but couldn't quite put her finger on it yet. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled her phone out of my pocket and held it up in front of her. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized what I had done. She reached for the phone, but I pulled it away, my heart pounding with anger. "I know everything," I said, my voice low and trembling with rage. "I saw the messages. I know you've been cheating on me." Her face went pale, her eyes filling with panic. I can't explain," she stammered, but I didn't want to hear it. "Explain?" I snapped, my voice rising. "How do you explain this? How do you explain sneaking around behind my back for months, lying to me and pretending like everything was fine?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. She had destroyed everything we had, and there was no coming back from that. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "A mistake is one time. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice you made over and over again. You betrayed me. You threw away our marriage for what? For him?" She sobbed, collapsing onto the couch, her body shaking with grief. "I'm sorry," she kept repeating, but her words felt hollow. I couldn't even look at her anymore. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone who had torn my heart out and crushed it without a second thought. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Please," she begged, "don't do this. We can fix this. I still love you." But her words meant nothing to me. There was no fixing this. There was no going back. Our marriage was over, destroyed by the one person I had thought would never hurt me. "I don't care," I said coldly. "You need to go." She sobbed harder, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her to cry alone in the house that no longer felt like a home. It was over, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. When I reached our bedroom, I closed the door behind me and sank onto the bed, my body numb with grief. The life I had known was gone, shattered by the betrayal of the one person I had trusted above all others. And as I sat there in the silence, I realized that I didn't know who I was anymore. I had built my entire identity around our marriage, around the love we shared. But now, that love was a lie, and I was left with nothing. I lay down, staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the chaos inside me. I had loved her with everything I had, and she had thrown it all away for someone else.